Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, derbyologist, and joining me again this week is Capping with Candice, Candice here. And Candice, this week, kind of a busy lineup. Of course, both Del Mar and Saratoga are in their second weeks of the meet. And we thought we'd take a look at some of the bigger stakes races and kind of started off on Saturday at Saratoga with a interesting juvenile race, and especially with a horse that is some relations to one of our favorite sires.
Yeah, this is on Saturday, race 3 at Saratoga. It's juveniles going 6 furlongs on the dirt, and you have to think the headliner here is Aldrin, who's a half to tap it. He's by Malibu Moon, and the mare on that is also the Dam of Tappet is pretty nice one. She tends to throw up some pretty nice horses every single time, and they paid $1 million in the Keeneland April sale for this guy. And for me, what I was most taken by, I saw the video of him, working before that sale, and not only was it really fast, I think it was like 9-4 or something, but it looks so easy. I mean, there's so many times that, we watch these videos of horses in the 2-year-old and training sales, and sometimes, they're just being really, really ridden, and with him, it was so easy, and that's really what took me. And you've got to think that he's going to run a nice one here, especially for these connections with Chad Brown up in Saratoga.
Last week we saw a $1.5 million juvenile kind of run up the track at Del Mar. Does purchase price affect the way you handicap some of these races, or do you just try to look at some of the basics to begin with?
I mean, it does a little bit, but it's not, for me, it's not a determining factor. I'm not going to say, oh, this horse is $1 million. Of course he's going to win. Obviously there's more angles in it with pedigree and such, and you never know why they paid that much money. I mean, most of the time it's because it's a precocious looking colt, but this guy actually, I thought, he looked pretty big. I thought actually that, he still is, he's a large frame horse who could fill out a little bit more, and even if he wins this weekend, he strikes me as one who, really could maybe do well, even stretching out.
One of the pedigrees that caught my eye right away is Spacetown, and a lot of people don't realize this is one of those horses that kind of started out with a low stud fee, and just from sheer numbers and producing a lot of quality horses, and especially on the East Coast, Steve Asmussen trains and some good works, and they paid a little bit of money for this Spacetown. His name is Baird.
Yeah, that one definitely caught my eye as well because of the connections mostly. They've been doing, Steve Asmussen with Rosie Napravnik aboard has been doing really, really well in Saratoga so far, and it's kind of, a combination people have taken note of. And yeah, Spacetown's one who, definitely you say is, a good first-time out sire and a good sire of 2-year-olds in general.
My top selection ended up going with a horse called the Jenius. Same connections as Moreno, Ari Gillott and Southern Equine Racing. Has some interesting work pattern. I think it's a little bit unusual that they're starting this horse on the East Coast. A lot of times they give their horses their first career start out on the West Coast. So I think this horse is kind of maybe one of the better 2-year-olds they have in the barn, and they're looking to maybe pop at a price here and not. I think they're definitely trying to keep it off of the synthetic, at least at Del Mar.
For me, I really think Aldrin's going to win this just by how he looked in that training video. Like I said, he really took me back in there. If you're looking for a little more of a price, though, one that I do like is Captain Moss. He's by Quality Road. He's have been done pretty well for himself so far this year, this first crop. And the dam of this colt is a half to multiple grade stakes winning sprinter. So, this is definitely one who I think, could maybe relish a shorter distance here. Fired a bullet workout coming in here locally. I mean, maybe the knock is that Nick Zito isn't, particularly strong with first-time starters, but he's had a pretty good Saratoga meet so far. Has kind of popped a couple at a price. So, Captain Moss, I think, maybe is one to keep an eye on.
Well, for me, it's one of those races I'll definitely be watching, looking at the tote board, watching them warm up, taking some notes. Last week we saw a couple of nice fillies make some debuts out west, and then also, a few of the juveniles did kind of act up in the post parades and stuff like that. So a lot of times, just keeping notes. Sometimes you'll see the development physically and mentally on their second race, not so much their racing wise. The Jim Dandy Stakes, $600,000, Grade 2. And on paper, I think the majority of the betting is going to come down to a couple of horses. I think Tonalist and Wicked Strong, both because of the connections and their race records, are going to dictate where the betting starts in this race.
I completely agree on that. You have to think Tonalist and Wicked Strong are the ones who really are going to take the money here. Maybe a little bit to Kid Cruz, but coming off that win in the Dwyer, but you definitely think that Tonalist and Wicked Strong are going to be the market leaders here for sure. And the morning line reflects that. And I think the morning line's pretty accurate here. 5 Tonalist, 2-1 Wicked Strong. That I think it might end up shaking up to be pretty close to that come post time.
Now with Tonalist, that's a horse that we talked about leading up into the Belmont. We were high on him earlier this year. Now really, he's won 3 out of 5 races. This is kind of a pivotal race for him. If he were to lose this race, you're not really sure where he fits for the Travers. Yet if he wins this race, now he's got a couple of wins, and then I think the talk will start to wonder if people wonders if he wins the Travers, if he can catch California Chrome.
I don't totally know if I agree with that. I mean, I think this might be a touch short. I mean, I know he's won over 9 furlongs, but that was in the slop, and we've talked on here a bunch about how much the Tappets love the slop. So, I wonder how effective he's going to be at this distance, not necessarily because he couldn't win at this distance, but I just think 9 furlongs, there's so many more horses in this crop that, can win at 9 furlongs versus 10. So it kind of brings a lot more of the competition into it. So for that reason, if he lost here, so if he finished a good second or something, I wouldn't really hold it against him for the Travers, because I do think that's a race that's much more suited to him and to his strengths.
So for me, I'm picking Tonalist. I just think he's the better horse, and I think sometimes even at, like I say, the good horses win at not their optimum distance. Mm-hmm. Horses like Ferdinand, Lost Code, other horses, when they cut back to 7 furlongs, they dominated on class. So to me, if he really is the classiest horse, he wins the race. If he's not, he's just another 3-year-old.
I'm picking him here as well. I do think he's the best horse here. I would say definitely his biggest competitor here is Wicked Strong, but I think he has blinkers on, so it's a little iffy. I don't really know what's going to happen with that. It seems a little bit of a bizarre move for a horse like him. But I think Tonalist, I think we're going to know, what this race is to them early on. I really think the best scenario for Tonalist in a race like this, that it doesn't have a lot of pace. You think really the only pace setter in here is Cousin Steven? I think for Tonalist, if they're really going 100% for this race, you need to just send him up to the front. I mean, maybe not necessarily right on the lead, but he needs to be all over Cousin Steven, ready to pounce, coming around the far turn. This is one of these races that, it's a small field, but if you get cute, you can kind of bring some horses into it who wouldn't have been into it in the first place.
I do think it's interesting that Wicked Strong is getting the blinkers. It's a little unusual, but I do think his best race when he was near the pace last fall as a 2-year-old, mm-hmm. and I think this is definitely they want him to show more speed. I think there is a small fraction of people that think really Wicked Strong is just one of those plotters that kind of closes at the end of races, and he is by hard spun, and his best race was showing speed. So and they kind of were a little bit, well, either it was lazy or just this winter didn't go right. And now I think, now that he's got some races under him, I think they're kind of going to kick him in the rear end here and kind of bring back that speed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seemed like he was capable of being close to the lead without the blinkers. So, like I said, I don't know about the move. It's an interesting one. I mean, he's definitely going to be kind of the horse of interest here to me, just to see how he reacts with those. And I think he's definitely a threat. This is really, I would say, is his optimum distance. And, in a small field, if he does, run up close, I definitely think he can give Tonalist a run for his money. I think everyone else here, it's a little more hard-pressed. I could make a case for Kid Cruz, but other than him, I couldn't really make even a case for anyone else in here.
Yeah, I can't really make a case for anybody else, but I do want to mention Legend. This is one of those horses that, he's by Tisnow, and I think this is one of those late developing pedigrees. So I think they are making the right decision and going in a race like this. And, if he runs okay, 10 furlongs wouldn't hurt him in the Travers. If he gets a little outclassed, maybe they cut him back to a Pennsylvania Derby or Louisiana Derby or something like that. So I think it's a good fit. They're very sharp connections, well-established New York owner for many years, and so I think he fits in this spot. And a horse like this, I just think he's going to be in the race. I mean, on paper, it may not look like. I think he's going to make his presence felt. And do I think he's going to ultimately win? No, but I think on the turn, Legend will be right there. And that last race really set him up. He got ran down late by Kid Cruz, but sometimes you need a loss like that to kind of wake you up in that next race.
I think for me, it's so hard for me to take anyone from that race, though. I mean, I know Kid Cruz won, and I think for me, Kid Cruz, kind of when I think of him, I think of, a really gritty horse. He's really game, and I think he kind of likes a fight and likes a battle. But other than him, I thought it was kind of an ugly race, to be honest. I mean, Kid Cruz was the first off the bridle by a long way, and, it's kind of like one of those rules in racing, like, the horse who's being hard ridden so early on just shouldn't beat everybody else in there, and that's what he did. And so it's really hard for me to take anyone from that race who lost to him, considering how early on he was being ridden as hard as he was.
Either way, the horses may be prepping for the Travers, but it's got a big purse. It's at Saratoga. There'll be a nice crowd out there. I do think the race is important because I think it's Wicked Strong's chance to show some speed and maybe pop with a 105 speed figure or something like that, or it's Tonalist's turn to win that second race in a row, which is always big for any horse, and get a second graded stakes and clearly establish himself. The winner of this race will be the favorite for the Travers, unless somebody really impresses at the Haskell, and we'll talk more about that later on. Also on Saturday, Del Mar, Turf Meeting the Surf, and the San Diego Handicap. A lot of times this is a prep for the Pacific Classic. What's unique about this year's race is a lot of proven synthetic horses in the last year of the synthetic edition of this race.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone kind of really wanted to see Frac Daddy coming over there. People have seen all the success that he's had on the poly, mostly at Keeneland. He's ran on synthetic at Woodbine, but that's a little bit different. For me, I really tried to go against him, and I had a really hard time doing it. I mean, unfortunately, this morning there was an accident with Dance with Fate, and he passed away, and he was supposed to be running here, and he was probably the one who I could make the strongest case for against Frac Daddy. There really isn't anyone else. I mean, I know Soy Fett loves Del Mar, but, the last race that he won was pretty weak at Los Al, and he just doesn't, speed figures-wise, he just doesn't seem fast enough. So, I really tried to find someone to go against Frac Daddy, and I'm having a really hard time doing it.
One of the horses that I'm kind of anti in this race is FedBiz. And it's kind of unusual because he's 2 for 2 at Del Mar. And this is where if you just go by the raw stats, you think, oh, he must like the surface. He must, he fits in this race. But I just think his running style, his overall form, and the other pace pressure, I think FedBiz is one of those horses I'm going to toss out of the exacta completely, out of first and second.
Yeah, for me, the one who, I saw on paper as one who they look like they have taking money and who I really tossed was Imperative. I know he broke his maiden over synthetic, but his synthetic record isn't all that special. And to be honest, his record this year is kind of deceiving. He won at Charlestown, which if you didn't see that race, watch the replay on YouTube. It might have been the craziest race of the year as far as whatever was going on pace-wise up front between Game on Dude and Moreno. And the other races he did really well was the Gold Cup and with Blue Skies and Rainbows and Game on Dude also at Santa Anita. So 2 races basically where he got, well, I mean all 3. Like his win and his 2 best finishes this year have pretty much all been in races where he was like handed complete pace meltdowns. And I just really don't foresee that happening here. So he's one who, maybe he'll clunk up for 3rd, but I just don't see him having really much chance at all of winning here because I don't see a pace meltdown, definitely.
The horse that I ended up going with is kind of a long shot. He's going to be at least 10, 12 to 1. He ran his best race probably last year in the Pacific Classic, and it's I Know. And this horse, I like the angle going Golden Gate, then he goes main track, now he goes back to synthetic. It's a nice distance. There's a little bit of speed. I think he sits 4th or 5th, and normally that's what plays well at Del Mar, and I think at a price he's worth using.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that angle. For me, like I said, I'm gonna go with Frac Daddy. I didn't really want to. I'm not like the biggest fan of this horse. It just he makes sense in the spot, and he seems like he's the fastest. And you know, he likes to be forwardly placed, but he can kind of sit just off the pace a little bit if he needs to. The last race he came off of at Woodbine wasn't super amazing, but it was, you know, he was being pressured pretty hard up front, so you can make excuses there. So I'm gonna go with Frac Daddy or over Soy Fett. It's kind of the logical plays. I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to see outside of the favorites here.
The big guns are still in the barn, Game On Dude and Shared Belief. I think those two horses will probably be favored no matter what happens in the San Diego. Although if Frac Daddy were to win impressively, he's kind of proven that he is a synthetic guy, so I think he would take a lot of money in the Pacific Classic as well. Now the Haskell, this is Sunday. It's at Monmouth Park. Traditionally, a race that favorites have done well in. There was a stretch in the late 80s that 5 straight favorites won. In the last 6 years, 5 favorites have won. You know, in the last few years, it's been 7-horse fields and 5-horse fields, but it seems like where the money goes, the money seems to be sharp. I don't know if it's the Soprano guys getting the inside tips here on this race or what, but it seems to be the favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because this year, I think, you know, at least for me, I'm pretty against most of, you know, the favorites in this race. I mean, Untappable, I could, you know, definitely make much more of a case for, and you think that she's going to go off favorite here. But, like, Bayern is, you know, surely going to be the second favorite here, and I couldn't have him at all in this race.
Now, this is a Grade 1 race, and 2 of the top 3 favorites, or 4 favorites, have jockey switches, and it's not because they want. I mean, one of them is because they wanted to on Social Inclusion with Edgar Prado. I think a lot of people acknowledge that horse has had some missed rides in the last couple of races, but Gary Stevens with the knee injury puts a new rider on, and it's Bob Baffert's main guy, Matt Garcia, on Bairn, but I think that changes the dynamic of the race. Normally you don't see that. I think it's a significant change for Social Inclusion myself. Not only has he been washed out in 3 of his lifetime races, he's also had bad rides in 3 of his lifetime races.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree there. He's kind of had a little bit of tough luck lately. It'll be interesting to see, you know, if the change here, how much that affects him. I'm not sure I really want him on top regardless, but you have to think he has a much more of a chance. But like you said, you know, with him, you kind of know what you're getting in the post parade. If you see him sweating up a storm, then you know he's kind of done his running before the race has even started.
For me, I am going with Social Inclusion. It's really the first time I've picked him since his win over Honor Code. And, of course, I won't actually bet him until I see him in the post parade, because if he is washed out and all lathered up, that means he's ran his race before. But I do think there's a couple of reasons why. One, I mentioned this the other night. This is the actual first race since his maiden race, his first ever race, that he's actually had a plan for. And for those of you who haven't followed along, you know, he broke his maiden. Then all of a sudden, Gulfstream added a non-winners of 2 allowance. So they decided to run him in that race, and then he beat Honor Code, which was a nice win. But that really wasn't planned. That race wasn't in the condition book when they broke their maiden. Then they were going to run in the Florida Derby, and at the last minute they shipped him up to the Wood Memorial. Then they wanted to run in the Kentucky Derby, but they didn't have enough points, so they threw him in the Pimlico, or Preakness. And then they were going to maybe run in the Belmont, and all of a sudden he was in the Woody Stevens entries. And then right after the Woody Stevens, they immediately said, we're going to the Haskell. And so that is why I like this horse, and I think his Wood is good enough to win it. He's got a 45.3. This horse has speed. He has talent. He has running style. Maybe the jockey switch is all he needs. All I know is that he finally is going to be 5 or 6 to 1, and I can play him at those odds if he isn't washed out.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see where you're coming from with him there. He is going to be a little bit more appealing from an odds perspective, and you know, I think even a couple of his recent races, even though, you know, he's had maybe tough starts and not the best rides, I think one thing we learned from him is that maybe he's not as headstrong as we thought. I mean, in the Wood, you know, when he broke a step slow and then really rushed into, what was, pretty contested pace, I think we thought like, whoa, this guy's a need the lead type. He's not going to be able to settle. And, after the Preakness and the Woody Stevens, I think maybe there's a little more potential there for him to be able to settle off a pace, which you have to think is going to be necessary here in a race that features a lot of early speed.
We haven't talked much about Untappable. I think she's capable of winning. I'll just be point blank. I'm not a big speed figure guy, but I look at them and I don't think she's fast enough. Visually, she has not been in a battle since last December, and the only other time she's ever actually looked a horse in the eye and won was way back last October when she beat Stonetastic, who had a large wager on, and I lost that race. So I'm not saying she can't win, but I'm just saying a horse that's now gone 8 months without being tested, running against, we saw last week that this 3-year-old filly division just has no depth. You have Untappable and you have nobody else, mainly because all the other good ones have gotten hurt.
Yeah, I mean, for her, I kind of agree. Like, I think she's perfectly capable of winning it. For me, I'm not going to include her, but that's mostly going to be from a financial perspective. I just think that she's going to be an underlay, and I really don't think that the risk of adding her to any tickets is going to be worth the potential reward. Like, if I'm going to bet a horse who, she's more in line 2-1, she's going to go up less than that, then she better be pretty close to like a sure thing or have a really, really, really good chance, and I just don't see that. If she won, I wouldn't be shocked, but I just don't think she's going to be worth the price. For me, it kind of came down to 2 horses. Ultimately, I landed on Wildcat Red. This is the horse who I've picked her before. I picked him in the Florida Derby. That's one thing I like about here is I think, even though he didn't win that race, he lost by only a neck to Constitution, who, was pretty highly regarded. And so I think he's a little bit more proven at this distance than than a lot of the other horses here. I mean, maybe save Social Inclusion, who ran a really nice race in the Wood Memorial, and then Medal Count, who ran nicely in both the Derby and the Belmont. For everyone else, it's kind of hard to make a case for them going this far. But I think Wildcat Red, it's stretching it. He might know he really want to go further than this, but I do think he's capable of this distance. He came out of the Kentucky Derby and ran the stakes down in Gulfstream. That was very, very, very nice. I was definitely impressed when that first quarter came up. I thought he was toast, and he just ran away from them. And of course, East Hall has since come back and won, so it kind of flatters his form a little bit there. For me, he's gritty, and he has that long stride that I think, serves him out well late. If this race really becomes a fight, I think he's the one who I kind of want to be my boxer, per se. As far as the other one who I'm really, considering here is Medal Count, mostly just in case it gets really fast up front. He'll be coming late in that situation. But regardless, he can race a little bit closer if he needs to. The post isn't ideal by any means, but I don't think it's, a killer either. For me, though, Medal Count's maybe a horse kind of like Tonalist that I'm really looking forward to going further, stretching out a little bit more. If Medal Count finished like a good closing second or third, I wouldn't hold it against him at all going into, I think he's going either Travers or Pacific Classic. So, this might not be the ideal distance for Medal Count, but he's definitely one who I think you have to include just in case it gets a little bit toasty up front, which, it's a definite possibility.
Wildcat Red, no mistake about it, he fits in this race. His last race was definitely visually impressive, and when he won that race, and it was not so much that he won it and he won by 10, but people understand that's a great race to watch, to see a horse that 4 horses came out of there for the lead, and you make the decision that you're the best horse and you aggressively ride your horse. He put away the other 3 speeds. They all lost by 30 lengths, and Wildcat Red won by 10. And it was just, if he runs that race again, he'll win on Sunday. But my problem is that Barron has got speed and Social Inclusion's got speed. And now if they get cute and they say, oh, we'll just rate off the 2 speeds, I think Wildcat Red could put away any other speed horse if he was ridden hard. I'm just not so sure they're going to do it. I think they're going to get cute and they're going to lose the race. I think he's shown his best races. I mean, the one race he went all the way around with General A-Rod. He was whipped from out of the gate and kept on running all the way to the wire. I mean, this horse loves to be prodded. He loves a fight. He wants to be on the lead, period. He doesn't care about the fractions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say with Wildcat Red that I think is advantageous is he always breaks pretty smartly from the gate. So, whereas maybe Social Inclusion's one who has had a little bit of trouble in that area, I think that you're right. I think that he's gonna rate off the two-speed horses. I don't see that being a problem. He's never done that in a route, but in like the Hutchinson and in his second career race, in the allowance race, he rated off the speed in both of those races and was able to put him away. I mean, he can't get crazy here. We don't want him sitting mid-pack, but if if this race starts in Byron and Social Inclusion up front and he's tucked in right behind them, I think that's the sweet spot.
Should be an interesting race. Like I say, for me, I love Medal Count. I'm glad you talked about him, and it would not surprise me at all if Medal Count won. I guess in order of what I see logically happening, I guess I would probably go Wildcat Red, then maybe Social Inclusion, Medal Count. But I think I'm going to look at how Social Inclusion looks, and I think he's going to drift a little bit this time, and I love horses like that. When they get pounded, 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 all of a sudden everybody dumps off him. He's 7 or 8 to 1, and to me that's value in this race. I can't play Untappable no matter what just because her odds are not going to justify it, and I don't think she's fast enough. Medal Count I just can't play. The problem with him is that his running style and that surface is always just so speedy. Some of the most unusual horses have found more heart than you can imagine at that Jersey Shore stretch, and he was ridden close to the pace in the Belmont, which I still think was a mistake, but doesn't help me now.
Yeah, I mean, the track is definitely what I'd be worried about with Medal Count, because you're right, is one that tends to favor speed. I do think they're going to ride him pretty close, but at the same time, I think the post is going to dictate that, maybe he can't be quite as close as they would have wanted him to be. But like I said, if he finished, a good closing second or third, I think that's, really what you want here, and then move him on to the Pacific Classic or the Travers. I mean, Medal Count to me is a serious horse. He's, really one who I'm looking forward to for the Breeders' Cup, maybe more so than these other guys, just because he is so good at 10 furlongs. But like I said, 9 brings so many more horses into it who, maybe just in this race with this race shape fit a little bit more.
From the Jersey Shore to the fastest gun in the West, we go to the Bing Crosby, a traditional favorite race of mine out west. And, really, if you were to write down a list of top West Coast sprinters, they're all there. One thing that was interesting, the king of the Keeneland Poly, Pablo Del Monte, the 3-year-old, goes out there to run in this race.
I was shocked to see him in this spot. It's so weird because, we talked about him a lot after the Bluegrass, and we thought that his, race there was pretty solid considering how that track was playing. It was really favoring closers, so for him to finish third there, and then we both thought was a pretty nice result. And, pretty much since then, they've been just putting him as like main track only entries in all these turf races and that haven't gotten washed off. It's been a really bizarre. And then to go from that, like, we're going to just put him in as main track only in like 3 different races that don't get washed off, and then it's like, okay, screw it, we're going to go for a G1. Like, I don't really understand the philosophy there, but it'll be interesting to see him in the spot. I don't really love him as far as his running style is concerned, having, other very, very legitimate speed in here with Goldencents and a few others, but, we'll see how he does, see if he can, hold his own against the older guys.
Now, the Bing Crosby is 6 furlongs. That's the classic 6 furlong distance. It's not 7. We have those races. Those are nice races. But I think, over the years, the 6 furlong horses from Santa Anita have represented very well at the Breeders' Cup in the sprint. Who is the fastest gun out west? I mean, Goldie obviously shortened up from the Met Mile. Wine Police, your buddy from the Sunland Park. I guess who do you figure? I mean, is it a speed race? Is it off the pace? Who's going to benefit from this 6 furlong distance?
I think in a race like this, you're going to want a horse who's close to the lead, maybe just off kind of that presser position. Goldencents could easily win this, but I do think he's a little bit more effective at like 7 or 8 furlongs. He could definitely win this. I mean, he's the class of this field, no doubt, and his Met Mile was really impressive, and he just keeps working like lights out. I don't know how he keeps doing it, For me, though, I think the one to really keep an eye on here is Big Macher. This is a guy who, out west has just been really coming into his own in, the last maybe 6 months or so. And, just ever so slowly, he keeps improving and improving. And, this is a step up in class for him, definitely. But I thought his race last time out was very, very nice. That was in a G2 at Santa Anita. The one concern I have with him here is that this is really the first time in his career that he's came back off of a long layoff. So we don't really know, how he usually runs this fresh. So, that's a little bit of a concern. But with Goldencents in the field, I think you're going to get a decent price on him. So Big Macher is one who I'm really looking on. I kind of like the up and comer in this kind of a race.
I'm going with Goldencents just because he ran a hellacious race as a 3-year-old last year against points off the bench. Points off the bench I spotted early last year in my older fantasy horse racing league and claimed him for a couple of dollars and rode to a couple of grade 1 wins out of him. And so I think Goldencents can come a little off the pace. To classify is kind of interesting. He's a 4-year-old with speed breeding. And in that last race, I think it surprised a lot of people, including the announcer. He lost the lead in mid-stretch, and then he came back and kind of put the nose down on the line. So it's kind of a deceiving running line. It shows him first, second, first, but he was there all along, and he got the head bob.
Yeah, that was an unfortunate race for me because I lost out on the head bob there, but it was a nice race for him, definitely. One thing to say with him that's interesting too is he has Mike Smith aboard, and a lot of people thought that Mike Smith might head back east to run Bayern, and instead he's here on Declassify, which is kind of interesting. A little side note, he's definitely capable. I'd probably be surprised if he didn't finish in the top 3. I think he's more than capable in this kind of a race, and there's others in here I don't really understand so much. I mean, Wine Police he kind of seems like he's on the decline. I don't really know why he's here. Kobe's back, would probably be okay if he could, for once break out of the gate, but that's just never going to happen. People seem to always complain when Kobe's back blows the start, but to me, if you're betting him, you just might as well assume he's going to because that's what he does every time. So, Declassified definitely is one of the, top contenders in here.
So we've talked about the 4 stakes races now. Kind of out of those 4 races, give me your top play of the weekend and what odds you would consider your top play, and then maybe another horse that, obviously we don't expect you to play every race the same amount, but who are your heavier plays and what are the minimum odds you want?
For me, I think I'm really going to focus on the Haskell. I think that's such a great betting race. I think, as far as the races go, like the Jim Dandy would maybe be one I would avoid. I just don't see that as a really good betting race by any means, but the Haskell definitely is. So for me, I think my top play would be Wildcat Red. I would love if I could get, 8 or 9 to 1 on him. I think would be really nice. I'll also play Medal Count in there. If I could get around the same, both of them, if I could get them around 8 or 9 to 1, I think that's definitely more than fair for them in that kind of a race. So that'd be kind of more where I'm leaning. The Jim Dandy, I think, is tough from a betting standpoint, probably similar with the San Diego.
For me, I think betting strategy-wise, I'm looking at social inclusion, but it's totally dependent on the post parade. And if he's not washed out, 6 to 1, that's a fair odds for me. I think it's a 4-horse race, and I'll take 6 to 1. And the second horse that I would consider in play for betting wise would be doubles in the San Diego. I think there's 2-3 horses that I would use in there, and I think there could be some potential overlays in the doubles or pick 3s. So including I know I don't like FedBiz. I would use Frac Daddy as an angle play. I don't like Imperative either. So, I think there's some ways to possibly luck into a long shot there. I think that's the most, I like to classify races as either formful or chaos, and I would classify the San Diego as the most chaotic of the 4 races.
Wow. For me too, I think one thing that I'm definitely going to be looking at for some of these races is, playing doubles and trying to see where I could go with that as well. And the race right before the Haskell is the Oceanport, and I think that's a really, really nice race in its own right. So, that's definitely what I'm going to be trying to maybe play along with the Haskell in some doubles. Fletcher has a horse coming over. Well, he's racing in England. He's racing in Dubai. Mushwash, who I really like, and maybe single him to 3 or 4 horses in the Haskell.
Now, last week you were the contest queen. You were on Derby Wars, and you did a contest, and you kind of pulled an untappable. You beat the boys in the big contest. Did they give you a weight allowance, or what happened here?
I don't know. It was a lot of fun. It was only the second contest that I've ever done, but luckily I got out to a pretty fast start there. Got a couple, horses at 7 or 8 to 1 at decent prices in the first few races, and then just kind of tried to manage things later on so that they couldn't cut into my lead. So basically later on I wasn't, in the last couple races I didn't hit anything, but I wasn't necessarily playing like the horses that I thought were most likely to win. Instead, I was kind of trying to play like price horses that I thought everyone else might take, just so in case, by random chance, that horse won, then, I kind of protected myself a little. But, had a good day, had maybe a little bit of a lucky day at times, and, was able to win it. It was pretty fun. There was like 4 or 5 people from Twitter on there that I didn't even know were in there till the end. So kind of nice to win when, friends are all involved.
Well, the one thing that was interesting is that you noted that it made you look at every single horse and their odds. And I think some people, sometimes we start playing so many races and we say, oh, I like the 4. And then we go to the Haskell and say, I like the 6. And then we go to the Bing Crosby and we go, I like the 2. And you can do that, but we don't want to try to give the impression that we're putting $1,000 on each of these plays here. You do have to kind of pick and choose, and some we like more than others.
Definitely, and contests are a little different depending on the type it is. Like the ones I've been doing are $2 win place format, so you definitely have to look at the odds a little bit more. I know the first one I did was when Fashion Alert ran at Saratoga, and for me personally, I played the pick 5 there, went 4 out of 5, and in that race I singled her. But then like in the contest, I played Take Charge Brandy just because of like the risk rewards there from an odds perspective, even though I didn't really like her to win in that race. It just made a lot more sense. You think, okay, she's probably not going to do worse than second, and second with her odds might be pretty close to if you would have won with Fashion Alert, if not the same. So you kind of have to look at it from a different angle like that, which I like.
Looking forward to next weekend. We will talk about the Whitney Stakes. There's also a couple of big races from Del Mar. We'll recap a couple of, if anything develops interesting in the Jim Dandy and in the Haskell. But should be a good weekend of racing. And follow us along Twitter, CHair889, and Capping with Candice and Derbyologist. And we will see you next week on Down to the Wire.